Hello, hello, and welcome everyone. This is Susan Simon. I am with the Allovance Advisory Board. Welcome and thank you for joining. We're really happy that you're here. I'm here with Sherif Farghal, who's the CEO of Allovance and also the founder of Pyramid Consulting International. And I also have the OPT folks here, Melissa Castro and Holly Grandy-Miller from the Office of Performance and Transformation, State of Michigan. So this is actually our second webinar in a series focused on decision-making and strategic prioritization, which I know is near and dear to all of our hearts, right? And we're really excited today to have you guys here. So thank you very much. The OPT team is going to share with us their experiences of what they're doing over there, lessons learned, best practices, and take you through this initiative that they're working on so that you can learn from it and get some good takeaways. So really appreciative to you guys, and we know this is going to be good. So just a couple of things, housekeeping items that I wanted to just run through real quickly. Everybody's on listen-only mode, but don't take that personally. This is with background noise. We want to get all your questions, so go ahead and if you have a question, just log that in the chat feature to the panelists, and we'll try to get to everybody, and if we can't get to you, then we can follow up with you one-on-one as well. We want this to be interactive, so we're going to have a few polls. It's going to be fun. So, and we'll also send you the slide deck after this webinar so you can sit back, have your cup of coffee. If you've got your lunch going on, relax, enjoy, and we'll follow up with you with that. So let's get going. We'll start with introductions. I mentioned we have Sherif here, CEO of Allovance. He's actually logged a lot of hours with lean organizations, and it is a passion of his. So excited about that. Sherif actually did his thesis at University of Michigan. He was getting his PhD, and his thesis was focused on how to make subjective criteria objective as it relates to making important decisions. And so, Sherif, you want to give us a little bit of background?
Yes. So thank you, Susan, for the introduction. I'm so happy to have Holly and Melissa here today from OPT. I think we've done a great implementation for Allovance at OPT, and we'll talk about it today. But as my background, for the people that are attending this webinar for the first time, as you said, this is the second webinar that we've done with Michigan Lean Consortium. And the first one, we talked about the concept of decision biases, and this is something that's dear and near to my heart. As you said, I had my PhD from the University of Michigan, and when I started studying decision models, I found out that a lot of people avoid subjectivity in decision modeling because it's hard to quantify. And so one time I was reading a book, and there was a sentence in that book that said that objectivity is nothing but shared subjectivity. Think about that for a little bit. So anything that we agree on, shared subjectivity, can be actually quantified and become objective as long as we agree on it, right? So I always give this example. I'm 6 feet tall because some people a long time ago got together and said this is 1 foot, right? And if they had said 1 foot is much longer than that, I would have been 3 feet tall. So some people agreed on something, and that became objective. So that gave me the inspiration and motivation to start pursuing that career in decision making. And over the years, I worked with a lot of organizations, helping them with decision making and strategic prioritization, ranging a wide variety of industries and wide variety of applications. And then in 2016, we started putting this whole methodology together into a software and a platform that we call Allovance, and it's coming from the 2 words allocate and advance. So means like you make the decision and then you move on because you're comfortable that you made the right decision. So we'll talk a little bit for the people that were not on the first webinar that we did. We're going to talk a little bit about Allovance today, but the main focus today is how we applied Allovance with the Office of Performance and Transformation at the state of Michigan, because they were starting their lean journey. And I hope that the people that are listening to this webinar in their respective organizations are also starting their lean journey, and we can help them a little bit with some of the lessons learned from this implementation.
Okay, great. And Sherif, you said something that stuck with me the other day. You said making big decisions should be a process and not an impulse.
Right.
And that our gut instincts are overrated when it comes to making. So I'm sure you can relate to that, Melissa and Holly. So.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, good. So thank you. Want to introduce our two folks here from OPT2. Holly, you want to talk a little about your background?
Oh yeah, excellent. We're just really happy to be here. We met Sherif at the Michigan Lean Consortium annual conference about 2 years ago.
Yep.
And when you find somebody who has some of the things that you find interest in, you start gravitating to their work. And so my background was basic in lean, came out of the 90s working with different kind of mentors, kind of pre-lean, Michael Hammer and some other people, and really got interested in trying to figure out how to make things better in government. And so through the years, I've been in government for a while. So through the years, I've worked at the Department of Transportation, the Department of Civil Service, which is sort of like the human resource branch of state government, and then licensing branch of state government, and received some awards through that work, and started to look at how can we share how Michigan's lean methods done in the licensing branch, how that can be done across state government. And then had worked with Melissa Castro and said, let's do this at an enterprise-wide level. And Melissa, you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm also really happy to be here. Glad that we could be a part of this event, and between you guys and with the MLC as well. So I've been with the state for longer than I'm going to say, and I've had a variety of roles, but about 6 years ago I came into the Department of Treasury and was working in the executive office, and one of my directors at the time said, hey, why don't you go talk to Holly about this lean thing I'm hearing about? So ended up creating an office in Treasury to focus on lean and continuous improvement. And here I am 5 years later working with Holly, and now in the statewide office, and running the team doing the statewide projects, and also training state employees on lean tools and principles. We were pretty excited. We just hit a goal of training 3% of state employees. That was our goal, and we hit it a couple months ago.
Nice.
Oh,
congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. So now we have our new goal that we're setting.
All right. Good.
And Melissa, I think you're co-chairing the Michigan Lean Consortium annual conference
Yes,
this year?
I am. So
yeah,
very excited about the conference. It's going to be great. That's
And
my pitch for the conference.
There's still time to sign up.
There's still time to sign up. There's still spaces available.
All right, good. So awesome. So let's get going. Let's go to the agenda and just walk through that quickly. So I know some of you were on our previous webinar, recorded too. So
Yep.
if you weren't there and you'd like to get a bigger deep dive into that, we can send you a link to that. We're going to talk a little bit about what is Allovance. So what does the method look like? And then the Office of Performance and Transformation specifically, we've got their team is going to talk about the project, and so you can pick up on some of those lessons learned. And then implementation of Allovance, like what does that look like, and the results that they've seen, early results, in addition to how it will impact the future. And then questions. We'll handle questions at the end, but if you have questions as we're going through, please, again, feel free to write them in the chat and we'll address them as we go. So, sound good?
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
so Sherif, I know we're going to talk about both art and science around making better, more lean decisions, and specifically how OPT does this. So Holly, I know that your team juggles with project requests for process improvement projects coming from multiple agencies across the state. And the challenge, of course, is limited resources. And we all can appreciate that. So for the benefit of those who weren't on the first webinar, Sherif, would you just give a quick overview of what the steps are in the method?
Yeah, so I mean, before I get into the steps, I mean, as I said, I've been using the Allovance method, right? The software just came up recently, but the method itself, I've been using it for almost, what, 20 years now with multiple organizations. And we have really applied it to different decisions. So we can categorize those decisions: capital allocation, resource allocation, and time allocation. We've worked with companies that wanted to prioritize their capital projects. We work with organizations that wanted to prioritize their lean projects. We work with organizations that used it for deferred maintenance, but we also used it for resource allocation and supplier evaluation. Basically, anything that requires strategic prioritization and aligning the work that you do with your strategic priorities can use Allovance. Mm-hmm. Today, we're going to talk about OPT case study, which is basically was about prioritizing lean and process improvement project requests coming from all agencies in the state, given the fact that they have limited resources. I think, Melissa, you said now you have 8 people that's supposed to be supporting the whole state, right? So that's really a big ordeal. So just for the benefit of the people that were not on the previous webinar, Allovance method is a structured approach for strategic prioritization. So if you imagine that you're starting your lean journey in your organization and you have 100 projects that you can do, you will never be able to have enough resources or money to do everything. And you just want to make sure that whatever you do is absolutely the right thing to do, given the strategic priorities, and aligning everything that you do to your strategic priorities to kind of achieve your goals. So creating a structured process around strategic prioritization is what Allovance is, right? So the first step, which we call strategize, is just understanding what your strategic priorities are and understanding what's really important to your organization and being able to put this in a form of a strategic value scorecard that then you can use to score projects. The second step is the compare step, which is basically coming up with relative weights across these priorities. And we'll talk a little bit in detail about that, but that's a step that a lot of people struggle with because of the subjective versus objective nature of the criteria that you have and how you can compare between them. Mm-hmm. The third step then is quantify, which is developing scales to be able to measure your strategic priorities. So if you have a strategic priority and you want to say this project scores 9 out of 10 in this strategic priority, how do you do that without having a scale, right? And especially if it's a subjective thing, how do you measure things against the subjective thing? So we'll talk a little bit about how we quantify the priorities that OPT came up with and made it objective and created scales for that. The fourth step is the score, where like all the project owners submit their projects into the system, and then the project gets scored automatically against the strategic priorities. And then the final steps to select is like, now that we have all these projects, how do we select the projects that fits within our budget or our resource limitations, but also give us the maximum alignment with our strategic priorities. So this is basically the Allovance process. So when we look at project prioritization, we look at 3 lenses. One is the strategic value, is how important this project is. You know, what makes the project important and strategic to your organization? The second and third things are complexity and urgency, and those are important and often confused with importance. Complexity is how difficult to implement projects, because ideally, if you have 2 projects that have the same strategic value, you want to go with the quick win first, right? Because you can achieve that goal much faster. So complexity measures that. But urgency is often confused with importance. And I think we struggled with that, Holly, when we were doing this. And some people say, oh, this is very important, we have to do it quickly. When you have to do something quickly, it doesn't make it important, it makes it urgent. So, right?
We found, I found myself bundling them together, right, to define something strategic versus taking them apart and really understanding, yes, what strategy is.
Correct. So that's what we're doing here, try to separating those. So eventually what we want to end up with is a chart that looks like that, where you have the strategic value and complexity, but you also have the urgency represented by the color. And then if you have something like this, you can look at, say, oh, okay, projects that are in the top left quadrant are strategic, but also easy. So let's do those first. And then you can look at all the other quadrants and do the same thing. Or some people might say, I know that there's a project that's not really in a good quadrant, but it's very urgent and we have to do it because it has a lot of risks associated with it. But at least this will give you an idea about how you want to prioritize your project. Of course, I don't want to talk about the software itself that much, but the software also has the option of automatically optimizing your projects and automatically selecting for you the portfolio of projects that will have the maximum strategic value. But you can also do it manually. So now that we talked about this, we actually, Susan, you want to go through the first poll?
Sure, yeah. So poll number 1, we asked for you all to respond, and then we can get a good sampling and share the results with you. So the first poll, the question is, do you use a structured decision-making and strategic prioritization process in your organization? And this is, your choices are yes, no, or I'm not sure. So if you could weigh in on that, we'll just give you a little bit of time here, and then we can share the results.
Yep. So, you know, in my experience with a lot of organization, when someone says, I'm not sure, that's probably leaning towards no, right, that you don't have, but so now that for all the results that we have, I think we have 38% that says no, 38 said yes, which is actually a good percentage, right? Yeah, it's a great percentage. But if you add 38 to 23, so that's about 61% of the people said either no, we don't have, or I'm not sure. So that makes me feel at least that good that the people on the phone here will at least learn something today about the structured process.
Absolutely.
All right. So now I will just have Holly talk a little bit about the Office of Performance and Transformation. And,
yeah, I can make this quick because we want to get to the meat of the story, right? So this office has been a enterprise office for about 2.5 years. We're moving into our 3rd year. And many of the things that we do for the state of Michigan is to support the agencies in how they improve. We also look to identify ways to reduce regulatory burdens on citizens. There's internal auditing consulting that happens through our office to help agencies identify risks and reduce them. And then, of course, performance scorecards, and also we do employee and citizen surveys. So it's really a full spectrum of support the agencies receive through OPT. And we recently, Melissa, won the 2018 Employee Engagement Awards, what is it, North American Awards?
Yeah, I believe it was the North American Awards, and yeah, we were the Government Agency of the Year for Employee Engagement.
Wow, yeah, that's impressive. It was amazing.
Just hot off the press. And then in 2016, to toot our own horn, we received international recognition for our process improvement methodology and the work that we've done to make liquor quicker in Michigan is what I like to say. So just a little bit about OPT.
Yeah. Okay.
That's great.
Could you, Holly, then to get things kicked off, and could you share with us some of the challenges that you had that prompted this initiative?
Right. So we have 18 agencies in state government. Sometimes that goes up to 21, depending on the administration. Yeah. And I came from an office that had 3 or 4 people that was doing lean inside my office, and Melissa had 2. And there's just not enough bench strength in the agencies to do the volume of improvement work that needs to be done. And so when we came together into OPT, we were really building a new structure, pulling staff in, hiring new people. So we had the same things any startup has, that rapid ramp up and build up, the desire to say yes to any project to make sure we're keeping momentum, you know, and then scalability. And then, you know, sometimes you fall in the trap of people are available. So yeah, let's do a project. I have somebody, I need to get them trained in our method. So let's do a project. wasn't too strategic. Do you want to share anything, Melissa, on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And as a new office, we really did want to get our name out there. So if you knocked on our door, we answered. So.
And I know here we have like OPT at 13 lean professionals on staff, but I think the actual people that go around and talk is maybe sometimes less than that.
Yeah,
so we have 8 staff that actually are considered, lean process consultants. Well, we don't have 8 yet. We will have 8 shortly when we finish the hiring process.
Yeah, right.
We're currently a little bit smaller than that, but we're growing.
But this is something that I see a lot when I work with organizations that start the lean journey, is they have like 3 or 4 people, that just have to service the whole organization, and every department wants to do process improvements and create new, and sometimes it's just not possible.
Okay. And as a new startup, sometimes the leaders, the managers, they are the resource that's doing the work. So in that 13 includes Melissa and myself. So the time to set aside and go, okay, what's the strategic projects? We just weren't taking the time to do that.
Right.
Because of that.
Right. Okay. And I have some quote that you gave us at that time. We'll share it at the end.
Great.
Talks about how you really felt about this process in the beginning, and then after we do the before and after type thing. So now we have another poll.
Okay,
right?
good. So poll number 2, if you could all please weigh in. The question is, which of these challenges have you experienced within your organization? And there's multiple choice. So you can pick more than one, but scalability, when to say yes versus when to say no to projects, urgency versus importance, strategic alignment, and limited resources. So we'll give it just a couple of minutes here. I know, relating to you guys having a new organization, it sounds like you had the pleasure to say yes more than no, but it does get rough, right? When you have to give the bad news too, deliver the bad news of when people don't get their projects funded.
Yeah, so actually kind of supporting what you guys just said is that 100% of the people.
Oh, the big winner.
Yeah, 100% of the people on the webinar said that they have limited resources.
Okay, so there are people having to give bad news.
And then the next 2 after that is urgency versus importance, struggling with separating urgency from importance, and also strategically aligning what they do with their, and then less people said that scalability and just having to say yes is more of a challenge. So the top 3 here are limited resources, strategic alignment, and urgency versus important, which is exactly what we want to talk about today.
Right.
So that's good. Yeah.
Great.
All right. So now we are going to get into the actual implementation of Allovance within the OPT, and for each one of the 5 steps that we talked about, we're just going to briefly describe what the step is, and we'll have Holly and Melissa give their insights and thoughts about how this went. So in the beginning, when I met with Holly and Melissa, we started thinking about, well, before we even look at any projects or talk about any prioritization, let's just talk about your strategic priority. What's important to the Office of Performance and Transformation when they're trying to implement lean on their lean journey across the state? And I remember I told them that we need to come up with all these priorities, and we came up with much more priorities than this. And then we started deleting and combining, and it takes it's a process to come up with all these. But I told them that when you come up with your priorities, there are certain things that you have to keep in mind. First of all, we're trying to create some kind of a balanced scorecard approach here, right? So try to make the priorities mutually exclusive, meaning like they are independent of each other. Each one is independent and collectively exhaustive in the sense that they comprise everything that you're thinking about. Don't leave anything out of your priorities, right? And let's talk about urgency and risk management later, because that will come later. Right now, we're just talking about strategic priorities. So we try to create that strategic value scorecard with OPT, and here's what we came up with, right? So Holly, can you talk a little bit about the 5 priorities that we came up with from your standpoint?
Yeah, and Melissa, feel free to chime in too. So for our priorities, sometimes when you start the conversation, you start thinking about the work that you currently have versus where we need to build out towards. And so the thing that was a #1 priority for me was we need to build more capacity in state government to do lean. And so when my gut was to select projects that, that's going to build capacity, there's going to be partners in the agencies, and you know, I'm kind of a mother hen to our methodology, so my tendency would be to choose that. But we had other priorities. So some of those dealt with some new edicts that came out through the state, making sure that lean was done before technology funds were expended. Some dealt with making sure that you know, the governor's priorities were supported. What else do we have up there, Melissa, that you want to speak to?
Yeah, so we had our departmental goals. Another big initiative that we've been going through that one of our other people in OPT does is burdensome rules reduction. So really looking at, are the rules that are in place right now really the best rules for the citizens and for the employees, and to get the work done the best way possible. So that was a large one for us.
Yeah, so the 5 priorities that we ended up having here. #1 is department goals, which talks about if a project is going to achieve a lot of the department goals of the department that we're working with, then it's a good project, right? Then it's a good project. #2, which is burdensome rule reduction. You know, how the project is going to affect the burdensome rule reduction. And then IT funding requests, Holly talked about that, efficiency improvements, and building lean and performance improvement competency, right?
Exactly.
So we agreed on all those projects and all those priorities, right? And we said, this is our strategic value scorecard. So then eventually, if a project scores high on these criteria, then it's an important project, right?
Right.
So then the second step after that.
So one question for you, Holly, is did you start then with the state priorities, or were your priorities specific to your, how did you?
So most agencies, when they're asking for assistance, each agency has their own set of priorities.
Okay.
And so their director has definitely a need. And so when we select a project, we want to make sure that whatever that project is aligned as tightly to their director's needs. The state as a whole has some priorities, and sometimes those shifts depending on the focus.
But again, I think the answer to your question when we talked about this is that this is what's important from an OPT strategic standpoint.
Right.
This is not, for example, like the governor's priorities for the whole state or anything like that. This is what's strategically important for OPT.
Great.
And so department goals, just because it's their #1, it may not be a project we should be working on just because there's the other 4 priorities.
Right.
Like you're saying,
Yeah. Right. So I'm just saying that you did not go to the governor's priorities and say, okay, we're just going to use the governor's priorities.
No,
this is just OPT, what OPT thinks is important, right? And that's very important when you start implementing something like this, is that you might have some corporate priorities, but you also might have some department priorities, and we have to separate between those 2.
Absolutely.
So then after that, we came into the second step, which was, okay, now that we have our strategic value scorecard, at that point in time, what priority is more important than the other, right? So that we can start prioritizing projects later on. And so that was funny, I remember that, because most people, I think most people on the webinar will agree, is that when you're faced with like some elements or some criteria that you want to prioritize, all you do is go and say, I'm going to give this a score from 1 to 10, right?
Right.
And that's, in my opinion, that's just number crunching that produces wrong results and actually leads to wrong decisions later on. So we use something at Allovance called the Pairwise Comparison, and I'm sure some of the people on the webinar are familiar with it, which is basically, instead of just taking each one and scoring it 1 to 10, we actually create pairs. So since we had 5 priorities, we had 10 comparisons, right? So you go 1 against 2, and then 1 against 3, and 1 against 4, and so on. So you had 10 comparisons that you have to do. And the cool thing about this is that you only focus on two things at the same time. And all you have to do is say which one is more important and just move the slider wherever you think it's more important. So that makes you only think about a pair of comparisons at a time. And then there is algorithms behind that can measure the relative weights afterwards. So the nice thing about this is not only it measures the relative weight, but it also measures the consistency of the group that are making these decisions and whether they are consistent or not, right? It ended up that this group here were really consistent, and that means that they understand exactly the priorities in their mind. So just to show you something very interesting, if we go to the next slide here, when I asked Holly and Melissa to start giving weights to those things, right? They gave weights. They said they scored it. I think you scored it out of 20, right? And you said the first one is 20, and then each one of the other 4 are 10s, right? So when I looked at this and I asked you, remember I asked you, I said, well, so do you mean that the priorities 2 to 5 are equally important to you? And you said, well, that's not how we thought about it. We just thought 1 to 20 and give it a number, right? And since you give the first one 20 and the other one 10, do you mean that the first one is twice as important? You said that's not really how we thought about it. So the relative weights came before that. The first priority was 33%, and then everything else was half of that, 17%. But when we actually went through the exercise, and remember, we got really good consistency, we got the numbers on the right. So you can see how different those numbers are. So the first priority, which is department goals, was actually the top priority still. But if you look at the rest of the priorities, first of all, they're not equal, and they're not half of the first priority, right? So that's kind of a proof, like how pairwise comparison can give you a very different results compared to when you go like 1 to 10 for each one of those. And these are like the correct results because we can measure the consistency and all that. So if we go back to the initial, to the slide before that, right, you will see the numbers, you will see the relative weights that we obtained. So the first one, so you see those yellow circles, those represent the weights that we just showed you. So step number 1 is coming up with strategic priorities. Step number 2 is obtaining the relative weights. So now let's go to step number 3, which is quantify. But before that, yeah.
So Sherif, before you had the sliding scale, what you just had a lot of Excel spreadsheets to figure out those algorithms.
Yeah, I had a lot of spreadsheets, and it was ugly, to tell you the truth. But now it's much more. So I would like Holly or Melissa to give feedback a little bit on this relative weight on the sliders and how you felt about when we're doing it.
So I did think it was interesting that it came out a little bit different than we thought it would, as far as, you know, the building LPI competency that was really tanked low.
Right.
Even though that's something that's near and dear to our heart, but, you know, if we're doing, it makes sense the way it ended up.
Right.
And it's probably accurate, so we were happy with that. I do think one of the good things about this, for me personally, was we were a newer office, and while I'd worked with Holly in the past separately, it gave us a chance as a new office to really have that conversation and come to agreement on the same goals where we had both come from a different place before. So just having that discussion about this was really valuable to me.
Yeah, I am sold on pairwise comparison. I want to learn more. I want to, Sherif has a coaching module that you can be part of. But what I loved about this exercise was sometimes when you're trying to prioritize, you know, strategies or objectives, you feel like there's a sum total that you're trying to add up to. Like I only have, you know, 100 points and I have to distribute it against all of these. What was nice about the pairwise is that for each of these priorities, I had to thoughtfully think about how I would choose a project between all the other priorities.
All right, yeah.
Which is a different way of thinking. And every time I did that, our conversation got deeper and deeper into what our criteria would be. And we didn't know we were going there.
Right.
But we were, you know, it was just really, I really enjoyed it.
Did it make it easier to come to an agreement or a consensus, would you say? Or was that still difficult to?
I felt like it helped build us into the next piece of this methodology, because I was starting by doing a pairwise and talking about, are department goals more important than reducing burdensome rules? Are department goals more important than IT funding requests? When I started doing that, the conversation around why you're starting to build those. Okay, the next piece is how would you build some anchors to when you actually have a project to be able to say, yes, this is why.
So I agree with that 100% with what you and Melissa said, because those conversations when you're doing the pairwise comparison, and you remember, everybody sitting around the table, they're supposed to be thinking the same way, right? But 100% of the time they're not, and everyone has their own agendas and priorities, and so when you create, like Melissa was saying, when you create those conversations, you're forcing people to discuss difficult topics, and then the numbers and all that you don't think about. It's going to come out by itself, but it's just thinking about which one is more important.
Yeah, and one other thing I think that's interesting, which you maybe reviewed before you had those meetings with your team, are some of the biases that relate to decision making, and just educating your team on what are those biases so that you're aware at least when you're factoring those into your.
Well, and if you're a leader who built an office and built a concept that's being launched, that bottom one, build LPI competency, that was my baby. I was doing that for
there's that bias, right?
And so when you're going to use this tool, this pairwise, with any other decision making opportunity, walking in, you're going to see some people, have physical reactions. Like the outcome, I remember having a cold sweat at one moment, and then realizing 3%, everything I worked for is 3%. But it's okay. It's a foundation, and I know when you're building something new, foundation's important, but it's not everything.
And the other thing too is that this is a dynamic model, meaning like that was the case when we did it in the last year. This year may be different, because maybe you've worked on department goals and you established that. Maybe other goals now are becoming more important. So it's I encourage everybody that uses this model to just every quarter, every year, every half year, whatever, to just update their weights and understand how the priorities change with time, depending on the circumstances, right?
Yeah, and that's something I noticed when I was preparing for this meeting, and I did play a little bit with some of ours, because I thought, I'm not sure that I would make the decision now that we made 2 years ago. We didn't have the knowledge we have as a brand new operation. And so Holly and I were talking about, we probably want to relook at some of these.
So the cool thing here is once you change your priorities weights, the selection of projects automatically changes. Now different projects might be more prominent than based on priority. So now we went to the third step. Actually, there is a poll here.
Okay, let's do another poll. All right, everybody. We've got a poll here for you. Let's see. Have you used any of these comparison techniques within your organization? And this one is multiple choice. So number scale. So that's, for example, you rank something scale 1 to 5, 1 to 10. The second one, pros and cons, first in, first out, FIFO, or last in, first out, LIFO. So pros and cons,
It's almost 50-50.
Yeah.
Almost 50-50 between, so almost 50-50 between using 1 to 10 and then pros and cons. But I just have to caution everybody, because, I did a lot of research on this, is that using 1 to 10 makes you think about just the one thing that you're looking at and you're giving it a score. It doesn't make you think. So if you score something at 8 and another one at 4, you better mean that this is twice as important. Because if you don't mean that, then it's just numbers that you're throwing in, and it just leads to the wrong decision. So moving on to the third step of the Allovance, which is the quantify. So here is where I met with Holly and Melissa and said, how can you look at a project and say this project scores 9 out of 10 in department goals or in LPI or in IT funding, right? So we had to create a scale for that. So I just want to give you an example of how do we create those scales, because those scales are the primary reason why we transform subjectivity into objectivity, right? By creating those scales. You can take something completely subjective and transform it into an objective measure. So if you go to the next slide, you will see 3 of those scales that we created. So the first one was about department goals. So I asked Holly and Melissa, I said, how would you score a project, you know, on department goal? How would you say this project really is great in department goals versus this project is not that great, right? So what they said is that if the project, so that I created 3 levels of desirability for each one of the scale. So the high desirability is if the project is impacting 100% of the department's goal, I would call this a high desirability project. And then they said the medium desirability, if it's 50% of the department, if it hits the department goals, then it's medium desirability. And then the last one is 20% of the department, which is low desirability. So by creating those high desirability levels and then creating a curve in the bottom that models these desirability levels, then we took something that's completely subjective, like department goals, right? And we created it into a scale and a curve that then we'll be able to score each project on, right? So that was the cool thing about this. And then we did the same thing for urgency and for complexity, right? So for urgency, when you look at high urgency, how you defined high urgency, you said something about, you know, the governor's request, or, you know, or if something deals with these types of high urgency criteria, if something deals with high urgency criteria, then it is high urgency, right? And then you define some criteria for medium urgency and some criteria for low urgency as well. So, and then for complexity, you did the same thing, and then you chose to create a linear scale to represent urgency and complexity. Do you want to talk?
Yeah, I just want to share. What I did like about this exercise is so many times in the past I've seen the definitions for strategic bundle in urgent or bundle in complexity, and they are totally 2 different dynamics. And I actually liked that urgency actually was the last thing we talked about.
Right.
Because in government and probably in business, you know, the thing that's on fire that appears to be urgent, everybody seems is strategic, and that's not always the case. But having those pulled apart, not part of my criteria anchors under the strategy piece, is so helpful. So.
Yeah, because I think you said, Sherif, urgency is often confused with importance.
Yes, exactly. And that's what we noticed. I mean, I remember when we were having those meetings, and when we were having those meetings, and people would come into the room and say, well, this project is very important. We have to do it like in the next 2 months. Well, that creates urgency, not importance, right? So this was like, so this technique of trying to create 3 levels of desirability, if you're talking about strategic priorities, or creating 3 levels of urgency and 3 levels of complexity, and then modeling it on a curve, whether it's a linear curve or whatever, makes this quantitative and then helps us a lot in trying to measure and score all the projects later on.
And go ahead, Mo.
So I actually was the one that went through and did all the scoring after we created all this. And I will say it was nice how easy it was. So when I was going through and I'm thinking about a project and complexity, I mean, we have it so well defined. 1 process is low, 2 processes medium, 3 processes high. So it just made it really, really easy to go through and create those scores. So.
Right. So Melissa, here's step number 4, which is the scores, what you're talking about. So you basically went in and you have a project form that's created automatically for you, and all you have to do is sliders. You have sliders that talks about your project and how impact it has with all these priorities, right?
And I just want to share this too, is when Sherif did this with us, he didn't have this.
The software wasn't ready yet.
And so he just wrote the anchors on a whiteboard. for each of these, and had us look at projects and did a little color in, and it's not scientific. Now this is where leadership gut comes into play, right? And when you trust the fact, Melissa has years of experience, I've had years of experience.
Right. Yep.
I'm not going to argue over a decimal point. I just feel
exactly.
like please grade it over a little bit.
Yeah.
That's my comfort level
exactly.
when you do scoring. I also wanted to make a point. When we were setting those anchors, one of our team members came in, Brooke came in, and she was talking about, there's a really important project, and as she was discussing it,
I know, I remember that.
Yeah. And when she was discussing it with us, and Sherif was really keen in on this, and she was saying, well, it's really complex, and they need it tomorrow. And
so it's important.
So it's important.
Right.
And I sat there going, wow.
We were just talking about it.
I have a brilliant staff person, and the kind of how I've bundled things is really a poor model for my staff. And so moving forward, really getting people to think about strategic, urgent, and complex is three separate things.
Yeah.
So
well, this is also how you can give somebody bad news and back it up in a way that people accept it.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So as Melissa was saying, the step number 4, the score, it's just basically trying to input all the projects that you have and try to gauge each project's impact on all of these strategic priorities that we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, once we were done with that, we created this bubble chart. Remember the one that we saw? And basically what we did here is that we said these are all the projects that we have, and then we have only 8 people. Melissa, as you just mentioned, that our budget here is all about resources. It's not about money. It's about resources that we want to prioritize. So our budget was 8 people, and then all these projects, to do all of them, requires a lot of people, right? And therefore we did that. And what you can see here is we can have an automatic selection. So that the software will select all these projects, and you see the software focus more on smaller projects because it requires less people, but it's achieving the same strategic value as the large projects, right?
Yeah.
So this was just an automatic selection. You can still have manual selection if you want, but also once you have that, then there are 2 things that you can see. That we have all these green on the top left. That means that the projects that were selected on the right side hits all the strategic priorities that you have, and you're now achieving your goals, right? Because there is another point that I want to mention is a lot of people, when they have a lot of projects and they compare between them, they can say this is the best project that we have. Let's do this project. But the question that I'm trying to answer here is like, is your best project good enough, right? Because here we actually are able to give a score, a strategic value score for each project. So if your best project is scoring 16 out of 100, that means it might be still your best project, but that means that a whole portfolio of projects are not very good.
Meaning they don't align with the
They don't
strategy.
align. I mean, even if you do it, you're not going to achieve your goals. So that means there's a lack of communication either between leadership, that they're not explaining their priorities, right? That priorities are not trickling down to the people that are proposing the projects, or actually the leadership don't have a touch of reality with actually what's important to the organization. So when your best project is not good enough, that gives us a red flag right away that something is not right.
Well, and also if you pick the wrong one, 3, 4, 5 years down the road.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, I always give you this example. I was talking to vice president of a large utility company that we do work with, and they were telling us that they started this program 3 years ago, and it is I think it was like $3 billion. It was this massive amount of work. And then 3 years later, when these projects are being completed, they realize that they selected the wrong project. They should have selected something else. So what we're trying to do here is try to make you understand the impact of your projects before you make the decision, not after you make the decision. Because you don't want to wait 3 years and $3 billion later and say, oh, we wasted all that money, right? And especially with lean, is that people look at lean at a tactical level. So yeah, we're gonna do some projects to maybe save some money here and there, right? But I also look at lean from a strategic level, right? Isn't like wasting money at the corporate level in projects that don't mean anything is not lean.
No, not
right?
at all.
So it's not just at the tactical level, but there is strategic lean.
It's the worst application of lean.
It's the worst, yeah.
Which is so funny because most organizations have processes around everything except decision making.
Right, yeah.
True.
That's very true, yeah.
It's crazy.
But I mean, I've seen a lot of, and you've been in lean forever, right? So I mean, I've seen a lot of organizations work on lean and they save $2-3 million from some lean but then they go bankrupt, for example,
right.
because some other decisions at the top that they wasted money on. So when you want to apply lean, I would encourage everybody, and maybe you can add something. So apply lean at the tactical level, also apply it at the strategic and capital investment level.
Yeah, and I just think the better questions you can ask when you actually understand how to define things strategically.
Right.
I mean, you're just asking for better approaches to improvement. And then for state government, after going through this, the next thing when you think about the large scale investments in government, for me was to figure out how to get this decision-making approach into how we select technology. And so that was really important that I introduced the methodology to our technology side of the house.
And actually that introduction led to now DTMB at the state. The IT has just issued a contract for Allovance to use Allovance for all IT investments across the state. So you were right that they needed that, and hopefully it will work well for them. So now you know, from my standpoint, and I want you to talk about from your standpoint later on. But from my standpoint, using this method with multiple clients and multiple organizations gives you a lot of benefits. But the most important ones are, you know, you can have visibility to your strategic alignment. Actually, things will turn green. If I select these projects, it will be green, right? And if I don't, it will be red. So that visibility between what I choose to work on and my strategic priority is very important. And also better justification of the decisions, because especially in government, I mean, taxpayers' money, all that, but even in private companies, I mean, still the same thing is like, I'm not doing your project, not because I don't like you, but because it's not a good project. And compared to all the other projects, you can see it clearly, right? So that's good. But then from an OPT standpoint, Holly, what did you benefit from this?
Yeah, you know, I'm such a geek when it comes to discussions and making decisions. I just felt that using this criteria just built the level of understanding a little deeper around and it made it easier to pick a project, or it made it easier to talk about why we should maybe delay a project. Sometimes what we don't do is we don't say yes immediately, but we'll delay it for later. And this helps us. And then also, you know, I felt like I was way more, what do I want to say? I really was committed to the anchors I created. So when you have leaders in the room defining not just the strategic priority, but like how would something fall in that priority, you're more, you know, attracted to that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the big one that we said a couple times is that urgency and complexity does not make it strategic.
Correct.
I keep on telling myself that. But every time you get a call from another leader, you know, you want to respond to urgency and complexity. But I think that's really important to remember. It's not strategic. And then, like Melissa and I, we were talking about this, and you have more experience actually setting the projects into the tool, but needing to revisit the criteria after a while.
Yeah, the weights and the criteria have this dynamic nature.
Did you want to share anything, Melissa? You don't have to.
I think you covered it, actually.
I have a question. Go on, Melissa. Do you see there an opportunity then to do post-mortem down the road in terms of the projects that you pick? Are you guys thinking about it?
Yeah, so we were talking on the way here, and there was even one that, you know, like I said, we've kind of been in say yes mode, and we've been able to make it work. But as we go forward, and, you know, as people know about us more, we are going to have to start getting into that say no more. And I said there was One that we did last year that, you know, in hindsight, looking at when I ran it through this project criteria, you know, that might have been one I would have said no to.
Just said no to.
And based on how it worked out, that probably was would have been the right decision.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, just to be a little bit more honest, you ran it through there, and
Yeah.
it said don't pick it.
It's a low value.
Yeah. And because of the pressures of urgency and complexity, we said, okay, yes, let's do it for our friend who is
That's
under.
a great example. Friend,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
personal. Yeah, so
And
that's a great
It was very
example.
brave of
That's
you
a great
to do that,
Yeah.
Holly.
The God bless her heart, you know, she's the one that said, you know what, looking back, and her gut was right to say no on that too.
Yeah.
But, you know, working together for the first time, she may not have wanted to say no in front of me.
Well, but again, we have been in that startup mode, so we are.
That's great. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a great use of this method,
Yeah.
right? Because
But,
that's exactly what we're
And
doing.
it also shows that you can still make decisions that are red, right? It's
Right.
eyes wide open.
Yeah.
So there is a final quote.
Oh, yeah.
There's a nice
A
quote.
very lengthy
And
one.
what I like from what you said here about using OPT, using Allovance, is that, you know, creating a prioritization model just doesn't sound fun, but you dread doing that.
Yeah.
But then after we started using this, it was just fun, right? So that's a really great.
That's because we have geeks in the background.
That's a great testimony.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, I really am sold on having a really strong, like, facilitator or coach to help you walk through the methodology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it would not have been fun if Sherif wasn't working on this. It would have been hard.
You guys have been great.
I do have a question that came in, but I want to make sure.
And we're in the question side. So if we receive any question, we'll answer. But this one came in. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is, how would they implement a process like this, if you have feedback?
So, I mean, you know, my experience working with OPT and other organizations is focused on people, right? Is we have to focus on people. So we try to go to an organization, and we have a certification program, and the certification program is creating people that are certified as decision coaches. We call them decision coaches. We're creating a joint program with the University of Michigan right now about creating that certification program, and it will be run through the University of Michigan in partnership with Allovance. And what we're trying to do is create that community of decision coaches, and by certifying people and making them members of that community, they get access to the software and all that. And then that's the first step. If we want to go into an organization that want to implement Allovance or implement better decision-making processes, that we do is we start by 2 or 3 people that are on the line to become decision coaches, and we certify those people and then go from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. Another question, Sarah asked, will this be available to print? Now, what I'm not sure is, Sarah, if you're talking about the actual slide deck, or can you print reports from? If
Sarah was asking about the presentation that we have right now, yes, it's available. We're going to send it to everybody. But if she's asking also about the software itself, we have a function in the software, report function, that will create the whole story about the model that we just went through. Then it's like a big model. It will talk about all the, so automatically you can create the whole report of the whole model from the very beginning when you did the strategic priorities until the very end when you selected your projects, and it will create a report either in a PDF format or a PowerPoint format.
So basically, you can print a business case as it relates to a process or
thing,
justification for your executive team or whatever it is.
The whole model.
Okay. Sarah, I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, please ping us afterwards and we can give you more detail.
So we have some resources that we have here. We have resources. So this is for the state of Michigan OPT website. You can visit there, and the link down there will take you there. But also you can visit our website at allovance.com or michiganlean.org, and you can have we have a lot of resources on our website that first of all, these webinars, this one and the previous one, and I encourage you really to go and look at the previous one, because the previous one we talked a little bit more detail about the decision biases that impact organizational decision making. So and you can find that there, and you can communicate with us if you need anything on the website. You can communicate if you have any questions that we can answer. And we have also case studies on the website that you can read and understand how we applied the methodology and the software to multiple industries and have.
Great. Okay, we have 1 minute left. Any other questions that came in? Okay.
The only thing that I want to say is I want to thank Holly and Melissa a lot, because really I wouldn't have found a greater team and great people to work with. They've been great. They embraced the change and the methodology and the way they changed the thinking, and they've been a great team.
And thank you for what you do for all of us who live here in Michigan. I mean, it's for all of us, right? So.
Well, we love Michigan, and we love you guys. You guys have just been really helpful to help us kind of think differently about decision making. Thank you very much.